So many for coming back to worship God again. It's like you just cannot stay away from Him. And who would want to? Who knows Him, right? But thank you for being here. Some of you for the first time. We're so grateful for your presence tonight. And we pray. I know this singing, it just inspires me so much. But as much as it inspires me, and I'm sure it does you as well, just think of what it means to God. When we lift up His name, and you think of the hundreds of thousands of other Christians doing that same thing today, and yet God hears not only every individual congregation of His people, but every individual Christian. He hears your voice, and thank you for praising Him so well tonight. In just a moment, we're going to complete what has been an in-depth study of King Saul. The life of King Saul ended on a very sour note, as we'll see in just a few minutes. However, we can still learn a lot from this man, and that's why I think I've studied him as much as I've studied any king of Israel. But before we examine what would be his final blunders, and they were horrific blunders, let's just take a quick review of his life, basically what we've covered up to this point. Now, I've said it numerous times. When Saul first became king of Israel, he did, I guess, as well as could be expected for the first king of Israel. After all, he really didn't know what to expect. There'd been no history of kings in Israel to follow along their line or their example or their habits or traditions or customs or whatever. So he really did a good job overall, but the longer his reign lasted, the more his faith in God seemed to wane. And this was evidenced by numerous examples of disobedience, total disobedience to God. For example, one of our studies back in 1 Samuel, the 13th chapter. This is where the Philistine army gathered in prodigious strength to fight Israel. So much so that when Israel's army, Saul's army, gathered to oppose them and saw what they were up against, greatly outnumbered, outmanned, outgunned, outspeared, outsworded, out-armored, everything, many of them just fled. And some of those just went and hid themselves. They were afraid. And it's hard to blame them because on paper, Israel's army didn't stand a chance. Unless they had divine intervention. Unless God came and with a strong hand. And God would have done that. He would have helped Israel decisively beat an overwhelming army, the Philistines, had it not been for one act of disobedience on the part of King Saul. Now earlier, Samuel had instructed Saul to go to Gilgal and wait there 7 days until Samuel arrived. And Samuel knew the Philistines were gathered. But he said, you go down there, you wait 7 days until I come, I'll offer a sacrifice, and I will tell you what to do. How to defeat this incredible army. But at the end of 7 days, when it appeared to King Saul that Samuel was not going to get there, he took it upon himself to offer the sacrifice that Samuel was supposed to. And at that very moment he was finishing offering the sacrifice, that's when Samuel arrived and read King Saul the riot act. I mean, what have you done? Like, how could you do this thing? Well, as a result of that, for the time being, they didn't instantly go to war. The Philistines remained in position, but they did send several, I think 3, maybe 4, I forget, raiding parties into Israeli territory and took some of their territory, some of their cities immediately. But in chapter 14, King Saul's son, Jonathan, one of the bravest men who has ever lived, took it upon himself to attack the Philistines where they were. And of course, he and his armor bearer, I mean, who were they, right? But they believed with God's help they could start something against the Philistine army. And Jonathan, with the help of God, initiated a victory against the Philistines, an overwhelming victory. Now that was great news for King Saul because he finally joined in that battle that his son basically started. But far better than the victory was the fact that God apparently was willing to give King Saul a second chance. And that takes us to 1 Samuel chapter 15. Now again, we're just summarizing here. Samuel just had one order on this occasion for King Saul. You are to attack the Amalekites, which had done Israel a horrible injustice many, many years prior to this. But you're to attack those people. You're to kill everyone, every single person, and all their animals, all their livestock. Kill them all. Well, Saul obeyed initially. He did attack the Amalekites. But then he spared the king, one person. Now, just one out of hundreds of thousands doesn't seem much. But one little act of disobedience is equivalent to just all disobedience, in fact. So he spared the king and the best of all the animals that they found and the livestock. And when God saw this, it made God extremely angry, even though it was just a little disobedience. But it definitely got God's attention. So he sent Samuel to King Saul to let him know how God felt. And in 1 Samuel 15, verse 23, at the end of this, Samuel tells Saul, because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has also rejected you from being king. It's like he gave you a second chance. He told you exactly what to do, and you blew it. Now, Saul would continue to reign for many years after this, but only in the eyes of Israel. He would no longer reign in the eyes of God. God had rejected him. God had a replacement in mind. David, of course, who would later come to rule. All right, with that, we're going to come to King Saul's final blunders, which occurred years later, in fact, after Samuel had died. Just prior to his death, Samuel had anointed David to be the next king. But David would not assume the throne until many years later. Moreover, King Saul, in the intervening years, had become increasingly jealous about David, and that all basically started with the story of David and Goliath. Remember that? And then David went on from there to kill thousands and thousands of Philistines and other enemies. So it became a song among some of the women in Israel. Saul has killed his thousands and David his 10,000s. And when Saul heard that, it made him very, very upset against David. In fact, King Saul became increasingly paranoid that somehow David was after him, and maybe even a little psychotic at times, because Saul's going to spend most of his last years hunting David. Instead of being out there watching over his people and his land and his armies for all the enemies around, he was just looking for David. And yet no more loyal man to King Saul ever lived than David. He had two chances to kill King Saul when King Saul was chasing him and let his guard down, as it were. But he refused. He would not lay a hand on King Saul. And why? Because God had anointed King Saul. And David knew if he did any violence against the king, it would be like saying, God, I know you anointed him, but so what? No, David was not going to dishonor God like that. All right, so let's turn to 1 Samuel chapter 28, and we'll finish the story. I won't quite read all of this chapter, but a good part of it. 1 Samuel 28, and I'll begin at verse 3. Now Samuel had died, and all Israel had lamented for him and buried him in Ramah, his own city. And that was a very sad day. He was a great prophet and judge. And Saul had put the mediums and the spiritists out of the land. And by the way, he did some things right. He obeyed in that instance. Because according to the law of Moses, Exodus 22, verse 18, Israel was to kill such people and have no contact whatsoever with them, according to Leviticus 19 and verse 31. So King Saul was capable of doing some things right. Okay. Then the Philistines gathered together and came and encamped at Shunem. Shunem? Shunem. Does that sound a little familiar to any of you? It should. Because in a different study in 2 Kings chapter 4, we find a very hospitable woman who helped the prophet Elisha out, so much so that he rewarded her, eventually by allowing, by the power of God, her to have a son. And later when the son died, you remember the story, he was able to bring him back to life, again with the help of God. Great story. All right, so we continue. So the Philistine army, they encamp at this lady's city. So Saul gathered all Israel together, and they encamped at Gilboa, which not too far from Shunem, by the way. When Saul saw the army of the Philistines, so he sent his army there, and then he comes to check things out. And what he says just frightens him to death, almost literally. He was afraid, and notice it says, his heart trembled greatly. You know what that means? When he saw the Philistines, he had a panic attack. You know that panic attacks frequently bring on something called AFib, where the heart starts beating very, very rapidly. So rapidly sometimes your blood pressure drops and you can pass out. And fear, incidentally, can actually bring that on. And that's exactly what was happening with King Saul. So he's desperate. His back is against the wall. Verse 6. And when Saul inquired of the Lord, he's praying, God, tell me what to do. I need some direction here. The Lord did not answer. Did not answer him either by dreams, which sometimes God revealed answers that way, or by Urim. Urim, now what's that? It's a special stone. Sometimes you'd have two, Urim and Thummim, but you'd have, in this case, a small stone, and using it was not too unlike what we would do today in flipping a coin. Except in this case, you'd pray that God would directly influence what happened to this stone. Okay? So let's just think of it as a coin. How would you know if God is giving you an answer? Okay, you toss that coin, let it land. If it lands 10 times on the same side, you know that's no coincidence. It's God telling you. Because you'd say, okay, if it lands on this side, this means we should attack. If it lands on this side, or that side up, it means that we should not attack, whatever. But if it goes back and forth, you have no direction whatsoever. And apparently that's what was happening with this when he tried that. Or the prophets. He'd probably go to other prophets that were alive at the time, and they said, well, we don't have anything to say. Then Saul said to his servants, and this is where he really messes up, find me a woman who is a medium. Medium, that's a conjurer, so-called, of departed spirits. They were essentially phonies, but they made believe. We still have those around today, by the way. They're very good in terms of deceiving people. All right. So find me a woman who's a medium, that I may go to her and inquire of her. It's almost like he's saying, if God won't give me an answer, then I'm going to ask the devil. That's what it sounds like. And his servant said to him, in fact, there is a woman who is a medium at Endor. That's such a violation of protocol for them to tell their king that. Because if they knew about this woman, they should have had her put to death. That's what the law said to do. But they happen to know, there's still one around, and here's where she lives. Okay, and the servant said to him, we'll go on verse 8. So Saul disguised himself and put on other clothes. Why did he do that? Because when he finds her, when he talks to her, if she knows he's King Saul, as far as she knows, he'll put her to death on the spot, okay? So he wants to seem like he's somebody else, okay? And he went, and 2 men with him, and they came to the woman by night. Possibly so it'd be a little harder for her to recognize him. And he said, please conduct a seance for me, and bring up for me the one I shall name to you. Okay, it turns out that Saul was not planning to ask the devil for direction here. But he planned to use the devil's tools to contact the spirit of Samuel. God wouldn't talk to him. The only one who had talked to him before was Samuel at times. Verse 9. Then the woman said to him, look, you know what Saul has done, how he has cut off the mediums and the spiritists from the land. Why do you lay a snare for my soul, or my life to cause me to die? Is this a trick? Is this a setup? Are you like a secret agent, covert agent or something? And Saul, here's the next blunder, swore to her by the Lord. Now, you can't swear in the Old Testament against anything greater than God. So if you swear by God, it means you're going to keep your word or you're going to die. Okay? He swore to her by the Lord, saying, as the Lord lives, no punishment shall come upon you for this thing. So he promises, I'm going to let the law be broken so that you can live. And I'll promise by the name of God that I can do this. I can break the law of God that you will not be harmed. Wow, a lot of mistakes going on here. All right. So the woman said, whom shall I bring up for you? Notice she says bring up. And it's interesting. There's a part of the story we won't have time to discuss tonight, but it's always been a subject of fascination to me. You'll see in just a moment. Who shall I bring up for you? And then he said, bring up Samuel for me. When the woman saw Samuel. Now, I have a feeling she was going into whatever she'd normally go into to kind of fool people, fake them out, make them think that she's actually seeing somebody. She sees him. And this is nothing, no part of her figment of her imagination, nothing she's making up. And she cries out with a loud voice. That's another word, by the way, for she screams, which a medium normally wouldn't do. And the woman spoke to Saul. See, this is Samuel, his spirit. Because this is how she knows this. She said to Saul, why have you deceived me? For you are Saul. She wouldn't have known that. Except somehow she got something from Samuel saying, by the way, did you know you're sitting across the table from the king? Something like that anyway. All right. And the king said to her, do not be afraid. In other words, again, I'm not going to let anything happen to you. What did you see? And the woman said to Saul, I saw a spirit ascending out of the earth. Interesting. Would that be from his grave? Well, that's a subject for a different time, but it's a great, great thing to look into. Okay, continue. So he said to her, Saul speaking to the woman, what is his form? Give me a description here. And she said, an old man is coming up. And he is covered with a mantle. That's like a shortened robe. And Saul perceived that it was Samuel. And here's another blunder. He stooped with his face to the ground and bowed down. Okay, that's not the one to bow to. Verse 15. Now Samuel said to Saul, why have you disturbed me by bringing me up? Again, I wish we could go more into that. One day we'll have to do that in class. It's a great study. Okay. And Saul answered, I am deeply distressed, for the Philistines make war against me, and God has departed from me and does not answer me anymore, neither by prophets nor by dreams. Therefore I've called you that you may reveal to me what I should do. And Samuel said, so, why do you ask me? Saying that the Lord had departed from you, and this is frightening, and become your enemy. You don't want to make an enemy of God. But that's exactly what Saul made of God. And the Lord has done for himself as he spoke by me. And this goes back to 1 Samuel 13 and 15. For the Lord has torn, because of his disobedience, the Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hand and given it to your neighbor David. Oh yes, the nation still sees you as king, but God hasn't seen you as king for some time. He's already got the new man. Because you did not obey the voice of the Lord, nor execute his fierce wrath upon Amalek, therefore the Lord has done this thing to you this day. Left you with an overwhelming army to face, and no instructions, no guidance, no direction, nothing. In verse 19, it's like he's saying, okay, you wanted God to answer you? Well, be careful what you ask for, because here's God's message to you. Moreover, the Lord will also deliver Israel, your armies, with you into the hand of the Philistines. And due in no small part to the fact that Samuel is talking to this woman, or Samuel through the woman, a medium that should have died. And tomorrow, you've got one day to live. You, and this is the hardest part for King Saul, you and your sons, your boys, which includes Jonathan, will be with me. You'll be dead. The Lord will also deliver the army of Israel into the hand of the Philistines. It's going to be a catastrophe for Israel. So it's almost like, here's the answer you wanted. What do you think? Verse 20. Immediately Saul fell full length to the ground and was dreadfully afraid because of the words of Samuel. And there was no strength in him, for he had not eaten, or he had eaten no food all day or all night. Now, the story continues from there, but we're just going to cover something in 1 Samuel 31 to finish the story. By the way, the next 2 chapters after this speak a lot more of David, who'd actually fled to the Philistines, become affiliated with them just to keep from being killed by paranoid King Saul. All right, 1 Samuel 31, this is Saul's tragic end. Now the Philistines fought against Israel. This is the big battle now. And God just letting the Philistines go after it. And then the men of Israel fled from before the Philistines and fell slain on Mount Gilboa. Most of them died right there. Didn't even live long enough, most of them, to escape. Then the Philistines followed hard after Saul and his sons, because they were the main targets here. And the Philistines killed Jonathan. So apparently he was the first to die. Abinadab and Malchishua, Saul's sons. The battle became fierce against Saul. He may have even watched his sons die in battle. I don't know. But the archers hit him, and he was severely wounded by the archers. Sometimes you can run from a man, but those arrows can be tough, especially when 80 or 90 are coming at you all at once. So Saul's critically wounded. And Saul said to his armor bearer, "Draw your sword and thrust me through with it, lest these uncircumcised men come and thrust me through and abuse me." In other words, if they get their way, they'll torture me to death. And then when I'm dead, they'll just rip me apart and make fun. And by the way, when a king was conquered, the Philistines, the Amorites are about the same way. They would do things to the body. And Saul was aware of it. We won't go into any detail there. So his armor bearer would not do it, for he was greatly afraid. I mean, they're losing. They've lost the battle. Philistines are closing in. He sees his king die. And there's no one else. So he does the same thing. By the way, falling on your sword. I've seen that depicted where you take your short sword and you would hold the point up just below your breastbone and you'd aim it upward. And sometimes you would then just fall flat on your face, and as you made impact, the sword would enter in an upward motion, piercing normally at least one lung and eventually the heart. But others would actually jump on their sword to make sure they would die quicker. Okay? No. For what that's worth. So he also fell on his sword and died with him. Verse 6. So Saul with his 3 sons, his armor bearer, and all his men died together the same day. What a tragedy. Not only because of the past sins, disobedience, but especially because he goes to a medium to ask for direction. The epilogue of King Saul is found in 1 Chronicles chapter 10, just a couple of verses. 1 Chronicles chapter 10, 13 to 14. So Saul died for his unfaithfulness, which he had committed against the Lord, because he did not keep the word of the Lord, and also because he consulted a medium for guidance. But he did not inquire of the Lord. The idea there is he did not continue to do it. He did it. He was looking for direction initially. But when the answer didn't come as soon as he thought it should, he decided to do things his own way. And Jonathan and all his sons and his army, and he would pay the price for that blunder. But he did not inquire of the Lord, therefore, notice, it says he killed him. Who? Not the Philistines. Not really King Saul. God ultimately was responsible for this death and turned the kingdom over to David, the son of Jesse. All right. There's at least 3 lessons we can learn from this story. If we look at the entire story of King Saul, there's a lot more, but let me just close with these 3. Number 1, listen, tragedy always results when we fail to seek God's truth and his answers for those things that come up in this life. Again, 1 Chronicles 10:14, Saul did not inquire of the Lord, and he paid the price. Solomon says, one who turns away his ear from hearing the law, even his prayer is an abomination. Proverbs 28, verse 9. Folks, we always need to be looking for God's truth when it comes to any subject, anything, any question. Lesson number 2. We've covered this before. Partial obedience is tantamount to disobedience. King Saul did obey part of what God commanded him to do when he attacked the Amalekites. But he didn't follow through. He didn't completely do what God had said. And so God said this of what Samuel did. 1 Samuel 15, verse 11. He has not performed my commandments. Saul tried to insist to Samuel, oh, yes, I did. God said, no. You don't do it all. And you've done nothing. Folks, don't be fooled into thinking that as long as you obey some of God's commands, that you can get away with something. Because you can't. It never works out. Saul learned that the hard way. And then the third lesson. Lesson of patience, which I need. Folks, if you need direction about a decision, an answer, wait for the Lord. Wait for the Lord, as opposed to moving forward because you're in a hurry or think things need to happen, or you're just impatient. That's where I have had issues in my life. Some of the, well, let's just say 2 of the worst mistakes I've ever made in my life. Some affect me to this day. Were made because I thought, well, if I don't get some real answer from God, I'll just do it my way. Wait on the Lord, David wrote. Be of good courage, and he shall strengthen your heart. Wait, I say, on the Lord. Psalms 27:14. Now listen to this. I'm reading from the prophet Isaiah, chapter 40, beginning at verse 28. This is a very familiar verse, but the end of it. First part basically says, pay attention to God. Have you not known? Have you not heard? The everlasting God, the Lord, the creator of the ends of the earth, neither faints nor is weary. His understanding is unsearchable. In other words, he has all the answers. He gives power to the weak, and to those who have no might, he increases strength. Even the youths shall faint and be weary, and the young men shall utterly fail. But those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. Thank you so much for your attention tonight. And if there might be somebody here who needs to respond to the invitation, we've got these front pews open for you. That is, if you could use a prayer tonight or encouragement, or if you're ready to become a Christian, and confess your faith in Jesus, and you've never done that, repent of your sins and be baptized in the name of Jesus Christ. If you've never done that, then you have a great opportunity tonight. We'd love to stay and witness your baptism into Christ. If you need to respond to the invitation, would you do so by coming up front as those of us who can stand and sing the song together?